Good morning or good evening or whatever time you're listening. Welcome to the latest episode. I think this is episode 13. I'm starting to lose count of the Practical People. This is the gardening episode. I have some gardeners who arrived just in time for the recording of this, but I think they're going to probably go away soon, so we're just going to swing with it, see if I can correct some of that in the audio. But anyway, welcome to the show. I'm very excited about this one. It is an interview with someone who I have known for quite some time and admired his work. Mr. Alec Gillis, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Christopher. It's a pleasure, and it's also nice to know that you keep your yard well maintained.
Well, the apartment complex, they do all right, you know.
You pay for some of that, so kudos to you, because a well manicured hedge. In fact, that's what being a film person, you contribute to the hedge fund, I'm sure.
Yeah, I managed to pay my rent, which is quite an accomplishment for me, actually. So I am proud of that. But anyway, yeah, this is I'm gonna admit I've been a little nervous about this particular episode because I know you and because we have had conversations about practical effects and what is the future of a practical effects person in the current world of CGI and the changing industry, and not only that, but a lot of you yourself have directed your own film, Harbinger Down, which I really liked, and I thought that was an enjoyable experience. And you're partly transitioning into being a filmmaker. What is that? What has that transition been like for you?
Well, it's funny because I've even when we're doing creature effects, I think part of our success is that we think like filmmakers. We have always been filmmakers. It's a kind of a term that people throw around a little loosely, you know, um, but we have been part of filmmaking teams. I'm 38 years in the business now, 30 years with ADI. So there's been a tremendous amount of in the trenches experience that I've accumulated over the years, and getting a chance to direct my own material is a form of just simply utilizing all of the skills and experiences that I've gotten over the years. Um, there are some new areas of experience, which are the exciting ones, like being able to direct my own material, working with actors, learning about distribution and sales, all that stuff that is the pre, the pre stuff and the post stuff to making movies. Raising the money all the way to having a screening, a cast and crew screening. Those are the things that are kind of the new areas, and they're very exciting. Having said that, I still love all the creature effects aspect. I love shooting stuff. I love set design and all that kind of stuff. So it's a tremendously joyous and fulfilling process. The challenge is getting to do it.
And this is kind of you say it's kind of like a new. These are new experiences for you, but they're kind of new experiences for a lot of people because the landscape of not only filmmaking because of digital cameras, DSLR cameras, digital technology has changed, but the landscape of distribution is kind of a brave new world as well. You don't just have the studios kind of being the gatekeepers anymore. You have a lot of opportunity to not only create your own material, but there are a lot of avenues to distribute it and get it to a new audience. Have you found that is a good thing? I mean, have you you definitely have an audience because of your YouTube channel. Are you trying to break into the studio like other filmmakers, or do you see yourself becoming more of an indie horror movie guy or science fiction movie guy?
Well, looking at the couple, that's a sort of a two-faceted question that interrelates, both parts interrelate. I would say, first off, in the distribution landscape, I agree that there are a lot of ways to reach people. For instance, our YouTube channel, I think we have about 230,000 subscribers and about 130 million views. That, 10 years ago, for us would have been unheard of. I'm sure people were doing it, but for us, we were not. We've had the YouTube channel maybe for 7 years, 5 or 7 years. I think it's 5 years, so it's probably 7 years.
I think it's actually coming up on 8.
Well, then we're technically right on that 7-year mark. That is an audience. If you think of 230,000 people, that's a pretty good sized audience. It's not an audience that would sustain a big studio film. You cannot get your money back on a $100 million movie with 230,000 people watching it. But I think what our analytics show is that we have a small and dedicated fan base, and by that I mean the fan base of practical effects. I don't presume that everyone is there strictly because they're ADI fans or Tom and Alec fans, although some of it is part of that. But mostly it's that there are people who are fans of practical effects. There may not be that many of them, but they watch with real dedication, and that is very gratifying to me. And that's where I have onto the second part of your question about what kind of filmmaker would I aspire to be, or am I headed to be. And I don't think, I have no interest in, directing something for a big studio, because I've been on set and I've been a support player on so many of these films where I watch a director, usually a less experienced director, who steps into the role, and by a month into shooting, he's having screaming matches with studio executives on the phone, and it looks miserable to me. It just looks miserable, and it isn't the way it used to be. So I look backwards into my history, and I think what are the most successful films that I've worked on? Not necessarily financially successful, but financially successful enough, combined with a pleasant and joyous experience of creating those films. And I look back on movies like Pumpkinhead or Tremors, and I say those movies were not without their pressures. The directors had their pressures on those films, but they didn't have a phalanx of bureaucrats sitting on their chest while they were trying to direct. And that is the problem with, for me anyway, with a lot of the big studio films. And I kind of feel like, who needs it? I'd rather have fun, and I know I can make good smaller movies, so why not do it? And then that leads me back to my earlier roots with Roger Corman and that model of at least making the film, not necessarily distributing it. But I can go on and on about distribution if you like.
Well, I think that I probably will bring that up again for the after show. There's so many comments that I get in the world of in the realm of practical effects. I mean, obviously, I'm a diehard practical effects fan, or else I wouldn't have a show dedicated to the subject. And I am branching out on my YouTube to other subjects because all aspects of filmmaking do interest me. A matter of fact, I did actually debate whether I was going to have you on the practical people or my household filmmaking podcast, but I opted for this show because I actually I think I've been trying to get you on this show since I first started it. But what really interests me is there are people who, come to me, and they're very well-meaning when they say this, but they see something like Infinity War, which is, like raking in $1 billion or whatever amount it is, and they see all the CGI and the grandiose spectacle, and they see that there's really not much story to it, but they just go like, look, man, this is like practical effects are over. you know, it's done. Disney owns everything. You know, these smaller films don't make any money. Nobody cares. And I'm thinking like, that's not true. But there's a lot of people that kind of come at you with that attitude, and you know, I'm sure you've experienced it too. How do you respond to that, or how do you kind of cope with that attitude towards what you do?
Well, I think, as you say, you're right to look at what you at least think the intent of the person is. If at least the person is coming at you with that, and they're well intended, you know, they care about you, they're a friend or whatever, then that kind of can mitigate, you know, that thing that you don't want to hear. I think we all have to be realists. If you're a filmmaker, if you're a freelance artist, you can broaden it out to just being a freelance artist. You have to be a realist. You have to look at what's working and what's not working. And then you have to also look at what are you in it for? Are you in it for the joy of process, or are you in it for financial gain? If you're in it for financial gain, then you probably have to, you know, it would probably be better for you to hone your skills and go get a job working in a production company or in the offices on a studio lot. And then you are part of a winning team. You can say, yes, I just worked on Infinity Wars. And that's a cool thing to say. But then you look at yourself and you say, but what did I do on Infinity Wars? Oh, you know, I sat in on some meetings and took some notes for people. And you know, is that what you're looking for? Maybe it is. Maybe that there's a lot of people who do that. I've had conversations with producers back in the day when I would work on a movie, and Tom and I would have a great relationship with a producer, and we'd say, hey, have you ever thought of producing independent films? And I remember Larry Franco, who was a producer on Jumanji, and he was John Carpenter's producer. He said, look, I used to do that, and I had fun doing it, but there's no money in it. If I need a paycheck, I have a family, I need a paycheck, so I am going to produce big studio movies because people want me to do that. He said, I'm not going to do anything else because I would be, you know, screwing my family over. It would be foolish of me to do that. So there's a guy who's like, okay, he's at a point in his life where, and that's not being a sellout, by the way. That's just understanding the reality of the marketplace. For me, like I kind of consider, because I'm a practical effects creator, creature effects creator, I think of that as my day job. That is my financial base. And that allows me to keep a studio going that is a fantastic toolbox and playground. And if I can get projects off the ground that utilize the resources I have in a lower budget, I think I can do some really cool little movies. Like when your friend says Infinity Wars, or, you know, that's where it's at. What are you doing, man? The flip side to that is when someone walks up to you and goes, oh my God, you worked on Pumpkinhead, you know, check this out. And they show you a tattoo of Pumpkinhead on their arm. Then you go, all right, that means something to people. There's a community of people who have been affected personally by my work. That's very, very gratifying. So so then you have to look at, like, well, what are the economics of low budget movies? Well, your friend would be pretty correct when he says there's no money in them. That's pretty accurate. But no money is too vague of a term. What does that mean? If you were to ask him, really, well, how much did The Witch cost to make and how much did it bring in? He probably wouldn't be able to tell you. He just has a general sense that when he goes to the mall, he sees Marvel movies, and then he reads something on his Twitter feed that it made all the money in the world, and that formulates his opinion. But if you look at it with a little bit more nuance, you can go like, well, okay, what about It Follows? How much was that? And you can look up the information. Sometimes it's accurate, but you can look at it. You can look at a movie and say, oh, wow, that movie cost under $1 million, and it made $4 million. Okay, $4 million is not a lot of money by big movie standards, but that's a decent return on an investment. So if you price your movies low enough, then you increase the chance of your investors and you getting something out of it. if you price your movies too high, and they're just, then you have to start getting into all the issues of casting and promotion. Do you have a budget? Like Infinity Wars probably had a 50, 60, 80 million dollar ad campaign budget, right? So you have to do that if you're going to spend 250 million bucks on that movie. You have to have that kind of an ad campaign, but you can't do that on a low budget movie. So you just have to. It's just about adjusting the. I always think of cars, right? Like, all right, there's a lot more money when you sell a Lamborghini than when you sell a Volkswagen, but the Volkswagen can still have a profit margin if it's done properly. If you market it properly, if you sell it, if you build it at a low enough cost, you can make money back. So the only issue there is are you actually able to eke a living out of that? And that is the sticking point still, that you can't necessarily eke a living out of these low budget movies, not dependably. That's why a lot of the people who make lower budget movies will make 10 a year. Companies, I mean, will make 10 a year in the hopes that they get a Sharknado, or something like that. Sci-Fi Channel keeps cranking them out. Some of them do really abysmally, and others do okay. And it's a volume game. So like the car metaphor, you have to make quite a few millions of Volkswagens in order to make the money that one Lamborghini makes. But if you enjoy the process, then that's a different factor that your friend is not adding into the equation. A little bit of a rambling answer, but speaking of cars, we had a Rambler when I was a kid.
Well, also back when you were a kid, you had a time working with Roger Corman. And you've mentioned before, yeah, see, I made transition there. You worked with Roger Corman, and you've likened yourself when you were making Harbinger Down, saying you were doing it kind of in the spirit of Roger Corman. Now, the Roger Corman model, he also kept cranking out films. He did a lot of what I would lovingly call knockoffs. I actually think they were a lot of fun, like Battle Beyond the Stars, Galaxy of Terror, that sort of thing.
Which I worked on, yes.
Yeah, you worked on Battle Beyond the Stars. Now,
and Galaxy of Terror.
And Galaxy of Terror. Now, was Roger Corman very hands-on there, or was he just kind of coming in and making sure that these movies were getting made in a timely manner? And is that something that you want to do? Are you going to, do you have like a movie schedule? Like, are you going to start doing kind of like that model where you turn out a movie in a certain amount of time?
Well, it's very difficult to say what I am going to do, because I can tell you what I want to do, but it's money dependent. Roger Corman, most likely Roger Corman had a bank that he was working with, where he could have a line of credit and make his movies, so he could be making 3 movies at a time, and as a result, I didn't see much of Roger Corman. I met him when I first started. He would be around the facility on Battle Beyond the Stars. I never saw him on Galaxy of Terror, but he would just sort of come in, at key moments and stand there and look like the legend, and do his thing. He was quite a presence. And you knew that because he had done every step of the filmmaking process, he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was very, very efficient. Some would say cutthroat when it came to keeping things on schedule and on budget. I can remember when on Battle Beyond the Stars, when we were frantically finishing a set. At the beginning of the film, there's a satellite that gets blown up, and there's a couple of guys inside this little space station. It's a miniature, and then you go into the set. And we built this. All the sets were built on wheels because there wasn't a lot of space, so we could be building them and then just wheel them into the shooting area, which was brilliant. So we were literally painting. House paint was on the thing, and it was wet, and we had movie lights on it, aiming at the thing, trying to dry it quickly. And Roger came in, and James Cameron was the art director. He had elevated to that point, and Roger came in, having heard that they're waiting for the set to be wheeled in, and he said, "This set is finished," and we're running around painting and gluing and stuff. And Cameron said, "No, Roger, I disagree. We still have a few things." And Roger turned to him and said, "Then you'll be fired." And he said, "Move the set on, roll this set into the stage." And he walked off down the hallway. I've never seen Cameron speechless. And Cameron took off after him to save his job and explain, and try to work something out. But Roger was fully willing right then and there to fire a key person in order to stay on schedule and on budget. So we rolled the thing in there, and I stood by, and I would come in as the actors were kind of rehearsing, and you didn't rehearse much. You started shooting. Mm-hmm. And I said, don't lean your elbow on the countertop, because that's all wet paint, right? Shit, right? And I knew that the costumer was going to be having a heart attack if there was paint on their costume. But that's an example of how Roger Corman was decisive and did not tolerate any deviance, anything that was costing money. If it should be shooting at that moment, you got to shoot it. Now, that is not necessarily an attitude that leads towards a high quality product. Mm. And if you look at Corman's movies, they weren't all good movies, but there was always something about them that was admirable. And that's where I picked up my admiration for low budget films, because I think that you have so many challenges in a low budget film that cannot be solved by money. So whenever I watch a low budget movie, I'm always interested before I see a film to find out what the budget range was. If you can find out information, how many days did they have to shoot and all that, that gives me a greater appreciation for the film. I know there are people who like to be purists and say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long it took to film. It doesn't matter how much or how little money they had. Excellence is excellence, and I have my standards, and I will not bend. And I go, yeah, well, that's fine if you want everything delivered to you on the same silver platter, and you're not interested in how the meal was made. But I'm very interested in how the meal was made. I'm very interested in all the stories about how filmmakers overcame the limitations and even embraced the limitations that made their films better. So that's what I love about low budget filmmaking, and that's why partly I say because it's doable. Honestly, nobody's knocking on my door to direct a big studio franchise film, but really I'm setting my sights on what I think I can do and what I think I'm good at, and that is lower budgeted science fiction and horror films, and I love them. So that's what I hope to do. We'll have to check back in and see in a couple of years what I actually have done, because it's been a little while since Harbinger Down, so that shows you that it isn't a really easy process.
Oh no, definitely. I mean, working with practical effects, do you still feel that practical effects do bring down the cost, or is CGI kind of starting to be a bit more competitive in that arena as well?
Well, once again, you just have to look at, it's a sliding scale. If you look at like War for the Planet of the Apes, I thought was a terrific movie, and I love the CGI apes in it, but somebody can correct me and double check me on this, but I think there's at least $100 million worth of visual effects in that movie. So, and probably 2 years of work, maybe. So when you throw those kind of resources at it, that's when you go, oh, well, that explains why it's so damn good, because they put the money into it and they put the effort into it, and they have a lot of talented people working on it. When you compare that, like if you say like, well, what can you do practical effects with $100 million? Well, there would be a lot we could do with that kind of funding. We don't get that kind of funding. It's not since the 90s have we actually been able to R&D stuff. We're just we're building on the fly, relying on our on our vast history of experience, and our team who's been on the top of their game for decades. And I don't want to say that the only reason that practical effects don't get used is because we don't get the budgets that CGI gets. But your question as to what's the expense? Years ago on Santa Claus 2, there was a question: should we have to have Tim Allen riding a reindeer? Should that be a Phil Tippett totally digital reindeer that they track Tim Allen onto? Should it be a digital Tim Allen? What should it be? And we said, well, we can build you a flying reindeer. We can put it on a boom, a green boom. You can also use that for in-camera shots. If you put a cyc behind it at the sky and blow dry ice clouds by and all that kind of stuff, you can get practical shots, with handheld feel, whatever you want. You can get those shots in camera and reduce your digital budget and have that money to spend elsewhere. So they said, well, let's do a comparative budget. So we did it with the VFX supervisor and bid everything: the cost of creating the animatronics, all the way down to the cost of flying puppeteers from Los Angeles to Vancouver, putting them up in hotels, paying them per diem. We did all that, and her breakdown said that, well, if we can get 2 shots a day, basically elements for 2 shots of practical stuff per day, then it's break even. And we were able to get about 6 per day. So I always, and then using some AVP numbers that John Bruno, the VFX supervisor, shared with me, I always say that great practical stuff is about 3 to 6 times less expensive than great digital stuff. But sometimes digital is the only way you can accomplish that. We're not going to do a 1,000 aliens climbing on the ceiling practically. You'd be into a ton of compositing shots and all. I guess you could do it, but you'd still be into some heavy compositing. Right tool for the right moment. But generally speaking, that's kind of the landscape of higher end practical versus higher end CGI. When you get into the low budget world, CGI is very affordable because generally it gets down to one artist and their home computer doing shots for you, whether it's rod removal or I like to start with a practical foundation so that the digital work that's being done is enhancement rather than complete replacing or ground up. 3D CGI becomes more complex and more expensive to do. So if you can kind of avoid that, you're in a very good place. But there's tons of stuff that you can do as a low budget filmmaker with After Effects and 2D effects that are greatly enhance the quality of your film and make it look so much better than it used to prior to the advent of it. So CGI has come down in cost, but high-end CGI is still extremely expensive. And regardless of that, I think that what filmmakers tend to do is to look at the CGI and practical as tools and just apply the right tool for the right job. The problem becomes when studio execs get mixed into it, and they have a different agenda than the director. Oftentimes their agenda is oftentimes strictly money and budget driven, and therefore they will sacrifice quality to achieve the money goals. And that's where or they'll sacrifice quality and for the schedule goals. If they have a release date, and they'll throw tons more money at CGI than they should because it's a last minute effort to juice up the movie or to fix things that they're not happy with, or that the latest the comments from the latest
focus
group gives them, and that's where they will end up spending more money to hit a release date. So and that's all just a function of movies just sprawling bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are management nightmares. Giant movies being made quickly are management nightmares. So and I'm not saying anything that a digital artist would disagree with either, because friends that we have that are digital artists are always saying to us, "Oh my God, I wish you guys could take some of the load off us, because they throw stuff at us in the last minute. We're not happy with what goes out, but it's a finished shot."
Well, I kind of want to follow. I want to back up a little bit about home computers like After Effects. I use After Effects all the time. I think it's probably the #1 tool in my toolkit outside of when I'm editing in Premiere. But I'm finding that I've been comparing lately. I'll use the Star Wars movies as an example. The original Lucas Star Wars trilogy, where you have and right now you've got fans actually making what they call the despecialized edition, because he never re-released the original edition. They've been going and seeking film reels and actually putting back together the original cut of Star Wars without any of the revised CGI. There's a huge community of fans who want that. And then I was looking at the Star Wars prequels, which everybody kind of accuses George Lucas of, just doing. They just assumed, and I think this was partly because of, the PR behind it, but they just assumed that everything was a green screen, everything was a digital effect. There were no, but in fact there were miniatures everywhere. I think the miniatures, like for each film, outdid the amount for the entire first trilogy, and there were a lot of practical monsters and that sort of thing, or not monsters but aliens and makeups and that sort of thing, and then they use CGI on top of that. And I look back at it, and I'm one of those weirdos that actually enjoyed the prequels, and I look back at that and I think it's very interesting to look at. It's it's very artful. And now, and I know I have a biased opinion, but I've talked to a few other people about this who know nothing of the industry, but the new Star Wars movies, they look great. They look more realistic than they ever have before. But at the same time, a lot, people have told me there's something that's kind of a little lackluster in the face of what was. And it's there in every movie, whether it be, the Marvel movies are tremendously successful, and the Star Wars movies, up until the Solo movie, which seems to be struggling, the Star Wars movies have been tremendously successful. And, all of these movies have this overabundance of CGI. And I'm wondering, is kind of like, they say the Westerns were huge and then they kind of faded away and there's only a few Westerns here and there. Are there, do you see this? Do you see that there's going to be, or that there are people who kind of want to see different things? I mean, people still go to see stop motion, so they know the difference. I think audiences do know the difference.
Yeah, I think it's a question of what the size of those audiences are. It's a proven fact that there are immense worldwide audiences for Marvel movies. And Marvel is great because it's a mythology. It's a new mythology, and they also have been doing a great job of interjecting a lot of humor into their films, so they're fun. It's fun mythology. It's not stilted and dour. They're fun movies, and that's the secret of the success of those films. And if you look at I think they do very well in China. People love the action. They love the glossiness. The Chinese mythology or mythology plays a huge part in entertainment in China. It's kind of like where the West was back in the days of Ray Harryhausen and maybe even C.B. DeMille, where you have mythological stories and Bible stories and things that are from your tradition. So this is just, in my opinion, the Marvel movies are a spin on those mythological traditions. It's Zeus and Olympia and all that kind of stuff. But if you were to ask, like, well, is that a trend or is that a cycle? I would say, well, most likely. As you say, there are still Westerns. There's the pirate movies are very rare now. But things go in cycles like this, and the we kind of tend to conflate the issue of practical effects versus CGI. We kind of make that a black and white issue, and then that's a springboard to talking about or criticizing Marvel movies. And a lot of people who are practical effects fans tend to criticize Marvel movies, but they're criticizing them based on their lack of use of practical effects, and that's a fair thing to criticize them for, because Marvel movies are big, splashy, digital. They're like beautiful paintings come to life. Which is kind of appropriate since they come from comic books. And there is an aesthetic to Marvel movies that works because they've got that increased sense of dynamic. I don't want to say video game, because they do draw on comic book dynamism. We all looked at the books drawing the Marvel way and all that kind of stuff, and that stuff has translated into the spirit of the action and all that kind of stuff. The Marvel sensibility has permeated into all aspects of filmmaking, and I'm sure you could argue that there's a lot of Hong Kong kung fu movie influence in the Marvel movies as well, like there was in The Matrix and all that stuff. So when you get into those kind of hyper action fantasy movies, you got to expect that they're going to be digital heavy. They're also factory created commercial art. They come from corporate entities, right? Where you put the money in one end of the building and out comes this incredible action movie experience with a ton of people having had their involvement in it. And it's a hell of a process. And considering all the things that can go wrong in movies, those movies have gotten pretty darn good. But there's something about them that I am inherently not interested in. And part of it is that I don't feel the hand of the artists. I don't feel, or the artist. I want to feel the way I felt like, in the 80s, we go, ooh, Rob Bottin's working on a new movie, it's called Explorers, and I would see a trailer and go, it looks like a dumb movie, but it's Rob Bottin's work that I'm going for. I want to see what he's done, how he's pushed the boundaries. And, same thing with a Henson movie, like, Labyrinth or Dark Crystal or whatever. I feel the hand of an artist or a small group of artists. Ray Harryhausen would be the classic one, where that's a guy who is the driving force behind all aspects of it. The movie wouldn't get made if Ray Harryhausen didn't draw his 5 or 7 images, key images of the film. So I think those kind of movies excite me more, and that's probably at my age, I'm not the demographic of the normal Hollywood. I'm not the 15 to 25-year-old male or 15 to 40. I don't know what it is. By the way, our YouTube demographic is 18 to 40-year-old males, which I think is kind of cool because it's a big widespread of age. There could be more women on it, but from what I understand, YouTube is a more male-oriented more system, or it's a more male-oriented thing. There's just more dudes watching YouTube, and I don't know what there's higher women. I don't know if Facebook is more women or what it is, but it just, for whatever reason, it appeals to different people in that way. But anyway, back to the original question, which I've already forgotten. Is that my interests anyway is, since you're interviewing me, I'll just talk about myself. My interests are more in those smaller films. I mentioned It Follows and The Witch. I think those movies I think about more than I think about Winter Soldier.
And those movies still get talked about. They're I mean, not that the Marvel movies don't get talked about, but as far as fan followings go, there's I still see people online talking about The Witch and It Follows. And there are Marvel fans, but they're also kind of, I notice, they're I won't say they're forgettable. I mean, people absolutely love them, and there are memes around them and that sort of thing. But I think I see the conversations pop up around these movies, or like Blumhouse movies, or and I know that Neill Blomkamp, there's something about the word Blum that seems with the these up and coming directors.
Yeah.
But there is a there does seem to be like a new crop of names that are coming up that, you know, they're not Henson, they're not Harryhausen, that's kind of like the old guard, but there does seem to be like fans look for names when it comes to who's producing these lower budget movies. It seems to be part of what makes them successful.
I think it is the division between the big giant Hollywood blockbuster and the smaller indie films. Like we can say, oh, a lot of people talk about The Witch, and a lot of people put a number on that. How many people is that? We can't. We don't know, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in a bubble, and we're all in our bubbles, right? You go like, wow, there's a lot of interest in this. Like, for instance, so I go to film finance people, and as part of the sales pitch, I say there's a big online following of practical effects, and they say, well, how big? Put a number on it. And the only analytics of that number that I can find, really, I mean, you can find box office success of certain movies, right? Mm-hmm. Compare how much the movie cost to how much it made. But in terms of individual human beings watching, I can point to our YouTube channel. I can point to the Stan Winston School's Facebook of whatever they are, over 1 million followers. We have 230,000 subscribers. Those numbers are utterly unimpressing to people looking to invest money, because they go 230,000. I'll give you an example of this on Harbinger Down. When we did our Kickstarter, one of the prizes being a Blu-ray of the film. Mm-hmm. And when we use that information for selling other projects, we say, yeah, and we had 3,066 pledgers, and all of those people got a Blu-ray. And then they say, well, you've just destroyed part of your sales because you've taken that money in advance to get the movie done, but now what's left for us, the distributor? Mm-hmm. You've just taken 3,000 people off the market, and we don't know how many people there are who are going to be interested in watching this. And that's an interesting kind of negative way of looking at it. I looked at it as, hey, look at that, man. This is the tip of the iceberg. But I can't honestly tell them how much of the iceberg is underwater. I don't know. So it's an interesting thing. Like, to us, it seems like, quote, a lot of people are interested. But when you look at the success of the Marvel movies, then you must have to say, well, then a shit ton of people are interested in those. And I just don't know how to quantify it. I wish I could better quantify it. So I don't worry so much about how many people are into the same things I'm into or you're into. Mm-hmm. I say they're much more intense fans, and that is borne out by the analytics of our YouTube channel, because 230,000 people watch 130 million views, right? And we have, like, I don't know what it is. It's like 30 million minutes a week, or I don't even know what the hell it is. It's pretty staggering. A few people are dedicated to watching those videos. And so that's the question, is like, well, how do you monetize that? And I don't mean for greed purposes. I mean for the purposes of making more product, giving the fans more films that they can enjoy, more behind the scenes stuff. How do you take that number of 230,000 and 130 million views and turn it into something that is a sustainable model that keeps artists working and keeps fans happy, and you create a feedback loop where the fans are contributing in terms of the money and the and this is what Blomkamp has been attempting to do, which is to try to bypass sales agents and distribution, because that system is designed to be disfavorable to the artists and the people, the creators. Mm-hmm. It's designed to be favorable to the middle people, and so you want to eliminate those middle people and go directly to the fans, and that's the challenge. That's the exciting part. And your earlier question about how to make now we have many more options at our fingertips for distribution. It's true. you can get people, you can get eyeballs on your piece of artwork or your piece of music or whatever, but monetizing that is the challenge, you know, so that you could actually survive on it. And these are the conversations you and I were having. It is a very difficult thing to be a freelance artist and survive.
What about now? You talk about practical effects being part of your pitch. Have you ever thought in terms of more pitching yourself as just a director with good ideas? Because I've seen your ideas, and they're very good ideas, and I think that they're things that maybe the merit of the idea is what sells, and then you as a practical effects artist just present it in a practical visual way, but almost, because it almost seems like you said before, the argument for CG versus practical has become such a thing where if you talk to someone who's on the opposite side of it, they almost like they want to shut you down, they want to shut you off, instead of just focusing on how cool you can make it, whether it's CGI or practical. I mean, you have those tools at your disposal.
Well, usually, to answer your question, I don't go in and I never pitch a project and say, you're going to love the rubber monsters I want to make. Oh, by the way, this is a movie. It's not, it is, and the ideas speak for themselves in the form of a script, right? Followed by pre-production art. Those are the ideas, and you either like them or you don't like them. And then if the conversation goes to, okay, let's talk nuts and bolts. How the hell are you going to do all this for X amount of dollars? And you go, I happen to have the techniques, and come to my studio and you will see. And then you come to the studio and you're like, holy shit, this is unlike any place I've ever been. And here are living examples of, animatronics and puppets and creatures and stuff. I'm a believer, right? That's who you've got to make the alignment with. And that's what I'm actively doing now, is seeking partnerships with people who are passionate about movies, passionate about these flights of fantasy, and are looking to build a sustainable model, not necessarily looking for that one slam dunk, that's going to make them $1 billion, because that's just not likely.
But the the audiences are there, and like you said, keeping the costs low, make it so it can be, if you're not getting rich on it, it's still sustainable. One of the things also, I'm going to kind of talk about something that a lot of people who follow you know about, which is your Instagram, which is also very popular, kind of on top of your YouTube channel.
Wait, are you talking about at Alec_Gillis, that Instagram?
That Instagram, yes. Because you go on and you've got like these little 60-second humor pieces that you do. And this has kind of been interesting to me, because I find that there's a lot of people online now who are finding, they're filmmakers, they're making short films, or they're making skits, or they're making just like little, what would Lucas call them, like tome poems, just like these little kind of moments, and people love them and they eat them up and they bring you followers and that sort of thing. Have you ever thought about creating something that's like that, like little bites that slowly builds a following? Or
yeah, I mean, because, well, I am doing that with Instagram. Thank you for noticing. I think that for me, like, people who are ambassadors of an art or of an industry, I've always been fascinated by them. Like, I love the movie Tucker. That's a guy who passionately believed in what he was doing, and he was out there as the front man. William Castle, I get a huge kick out of William Castle. Or Rod Serling as the host of his own TV show. Walt Disney, introducing the Disney, whatever, I can't even remember whatever the hell that show was.
Magic World of Disney, was it?
Yeah. I guess, when you get Steve Jobs and Elon Musk up there talking, it's kind of cool to see who is the person behind this idea, and what's their passion, and what's their personality. So I just generally kind of, because I'm a little bit irreverent, I like to, as the English say, take the piss out of it, and sort of be the character of the guy, the self-inflated importance, and all that kind of stuff. I love that stuff. So yeah, so I do have fun with it because I come up with these ideas, and it's fun to communicate them to people, and they get a good reaction. However, if you notice on Instagram, you can look at the likes. Oh, look at that, 7,000 likes of my stupid little comedy vignette. Let's just click that and see how many people, 7,000 views. Mm-hmm. Let's click and see how many people liked it. Oh, 600, because they're watching it over and over. So I have to immediately, my approval rating drops whenever I do one of those 60-second vignettes. So I immediately follow it up. You'll notice there's a pattern with an alien or a predator. Get those numbers back up. Just let the people know that, no, I'm not spinning off. This isn't a comedy Instagram. You're still going to see monsters.
Well, what I was talking about, though, is, bringing more of the monsters, creating something that's like that, not necessarily comedy, but it's like its own original material. That what was it? There was something like Blart and Son, something like that. It was like a puppet. Yeah, that sort of thing. So,
well, yeah, yes. I mean, to answer your question, there is an idea that we're working on that would allow us a channel to do original content, not just archival BTS, but original content on a wide range of subjects. But we're still looking at the economics of that, because for us to do it, for us to build things and shoot them and put them out there, costs money. Mm-hmm. What costs very little money is for us to do BTS archival stuff.
Yeah.
And then you put that out there and you get some advertising dollars. We get, for our channel, we get just barely enough advertising dollars to cover the cost of Michael Heinzelman, who is editing the stuff together. You've done a few of them yourself. But it's times are tough. So to just say, hey, I'm going to make I'm going to do a short for $3,000 or $7,000, or I'm going to build an animatronic character that'll cost about $15,000, and then I can use it in multiple other. Those are all exciting and logical things. It's just, where does that money come from?
Are you kind of hampered by, like a lot of people are doing like some amazing work on really low budgets, but do you find that maybe because you already have the reputation of being Amalgamated Dynamics, that there's only so low budget you can go before people go, what these guys are, have done Oscar winning or Oscar nominated stuff, like what are they doing here? Do you find that you have to kind of be careful what you present?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, people look at our body of work and they go, oh, okay, whatever they put into a low budget movie is going to be exactly of that same quality. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, and this was, I've read a lot of comments and talked to people about Harbinger, and some people go like, why was it quality? It was quality sucked. The quality was bad. The quality was cool. Mm-hmm. Well, because what we could afford was the best damn bubble wrap tentacles that we could muster, mm-hmm. right? And that's literally what we could afford. Either that, or my joke was, if I had to, if we didn't have Sultan from Dark Dunes come in and bring more money to Harbinger, which thank goodness he did, mm-hmm. then it would have been Lance Henriksen in a closet with a couple of tentacles, really nice tentacles, probed under the door, and him soliloquizing. But luckily, we were able to mount a production that was bigger than that. But we had to tailor the construction techniques so that I could have 7 or 8 monster moments. So I had to make some decisions. They're tough decisions. And yeah, like, to give you an idea on the video, if you look at our video of The Thing, our work that was cut from the film, mm-hmm. to put it in perspective, our budget on The Thing to do those effects was roughly twice what the entire budget of Harbinger Down was. So, or another way to look at it was, we had about 15 times more money to do the effects in The Thing than to do the effects in Harbinger Down. And that affects things. It's not, sure, it's not all about money, but at some point, as you say, there's a cutoff where you go like, oh God, how do I solve this problem on $12? How do I and that to me is exciting, and I enjoy that. But there are people who don't get it. There are people who just go, well, like, it should have been every bit what any other movie you've worked on. And I go like, okay, be nice if the world worked that way. But if I could do stuff that was, as great as our work on The Thing, for instance, if I could do that at a 15th the cost, then that would be what we would be doing all the time. That would just be the cost of that work. Mm-hmm. But into silicone likenesses of human beings and complex mechanisms, it's really the mechanisms inside. So you have to come up with ways of telling your story that are more like hand puppets, wiggly tentacles, and then save some punctuated moments where you got a cool creature in a suit or what have you. And then the other way to do it, the other way to approach it is just do less. Just, literally have a single character. This is what was great about the movies in the 80s, was they tended to, the Predator had gore effects, but tended to, the Predator, the Terminator, RoboCop, they were built around a single creature.
Yeah.
Carpenter's The Thing changed that, and it became, there are 8 creatures in this movie now, because it's changing and constantly, and that cost more money to do that approach, but it just set the bar higher, and now we are in, where we are in the world where every, as we say, every Marvel movie, every big digital film, there's 20 different cool looking design projects in every movie, and they run through the frame real fast to come out and get dispatched with, and that's that. So in a way, it's like kind of like overload. It's like a Thanksgiving dinner where you just have too much on your plate. I'd rather get down to like, I'll just eat the candied yams and enjoy the taste of a candied yam. That's a low budget movie for me. The candied yams, the motion picture.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this interview. But I'm going to ask you to stick around for just a little bit longer, because we're going to do the Practical People post show for my Patreon supporters, where I am going to ask Alec about his time spent on the AMC shows at James Cameron's The Story of Science Fiction, which you were recently on. I forgot to bring that up at the beginning of the interview. And yeah, kind of rewind and touch on a few things that personally interested me in the conversation. So thank you for joining us, Alec. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me, and yes, I'd love to stick around.
Okay, all right. So we're not done yet. Please join me over on Patreon. But if you can't, then just let people know that you love this show and you think it should be supported, because it should. So whether it be morning or evening, whatever time you're listening, have a good one, and we'll be back for another episode of The Practical People.